They say you're too quiet, too intense, too much. You open your mouth and suddenly the room goes still. Not because you're wrong, but because you're different. You notice the things other people don't. You question what others accept without blinking. And bit by bit, people drift away. They laugh together at things that bore you. They obsess over drama, trends, and all the shallow noise. But you're stuck thinking about life, meaning, death, so you try to blend in. You smile when you're supposed to, but inside, you feel like a stranger among your own kind. And eventually, a question creeps in. Is there something wrong with me? But what if the problem isn't you? What if the truth is that society simply isn't built for people like you? The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer believed that real intelligence, raw, unfiltered awareness, isolates. That the deeper your mind goes, the more separate you become. Because most people, they don't want truth, they want comfort. And people who see too clearly, they disturb that comfort. This video is going to explore that brutal truth Schopenhauer uncovered, why society tends to reject the truly intelligent, and why your loneliness might actually be the highest proof of your mind. It starts early. You're in a classroom surrounded by kids your age, and yet something feels off. Not because you think you're better, just different. They laugh easily without thinking. You're thinking constantly. Why do people say things they don't mean? Why does small talk feel like white noise? Why does it feel like you're watching life instead of living it? That's the first taste of the silent curse that comes with true intelligence. Not grades, not achievements, but the kind of intelligence that questions too much and feels too deeply. The kind that spots contradictions in people's behavior, sees through tiny hypocrisies, and finds it impossible to just go with the flow. As you grow older, the disconnect gets louder. You start holding back in conversations because you've learned honesty makes people uncomfortable. Ask why too often and you'll ruin the vibe, so you nod, you smile, you pretend. Because being understood starts to feel impossible. People mistake you for arrogant, but really, you're just exhausted from explaining yourself. You're not cold, you've just realized that depth scares people. So you lock your insights away, you censor your questions, you hide your pain. Here's the paradox: society says it values intelligence, but it emotionally rejects those who carry it in its rawest form. We glorify genius in theory, but in practice, we isolate it. Why? Because real intelligence doesn't just solve problems, it challenges what's normal. It sees through illusions. It calls out the things others accept blindly, and that makes people very uncomfortable. You become too complex for surface-level friendships, too analytical to enjoy simple pleasures without breaking them apart, too self-aware to relax fully. And the emotional toll, you can't see it, but it's heavy. You sit in rooms full of people but feel like you're on the outside. You crave a connection that goes deeper. Someone who doesn't just hear you, but gets you. But that person never seems to come. So again, you wonder, is there something wrong with me? And that right there is the silent tragedy. Nobody teaches highly intelligent people how to deal with this kind of loneliness. They teach you how to succeed, how to impress, how to perform. But no one teaches you how to exist when your mind is wired differently. So you adapt, you become a chameleon, you blend in, you dumb things down, you learn when to stay quiet, not because you want to, but because you have to. Because every time you spoke your truth, you paid for it, and deep inside that weight builds, a quiet sadness, a hunger for meaning, a question that won't leave you alone. Am I the only one who feels like this? You're not. In fact, that feeling, that silent suffering, it's not proof of weakness. It's the signal of a rare mind trying to survive in a shallow world. Arthur Schopenhauer saw it all coming. He didn't just understand this pain, he predicted it. There's an unspoken rule that runs most of society. Don't think too much. Don't question the script. Don't make it weird. Just follow what's trending. Say what's safe. Agree with the loudest voice in the room. That's what Schopenhauer called the herd, the tendency for people to surrender their thoughts, not because they're dumb, but because independent thinking is dangerous. That's why truly intelligent people are feared. Not because they're smarter, but because they refuse to worship the herd. Ask why too many times, the group gets uneasy. Point out contradictions, blind traditions, or shallow thinking. The group gets defensive. It's not logical. It's psychological. In every classroom, every workplace, every community. There's this quiet pressure, conform or be cast out. And intelligent people, by their very nature, resist that pressure. Not because they want to rebel, but because they can't help seeking truth. But here's the hard truth. Thinking differently isn't praised, it's punished. Because intelligence doesn't just challenge facts, it challenges comfort, it disturbs the illusion. It shines a light on everything people would rather ignore. So when you walk into a room and say something that reveals the group's hypocrisy, or when you suggest an idea that hasn't been pre-approved by mass consensus, or when you challenge the system instead of playing along, you don't get applause. You get labels: weird, too intense, not a team player. Look at the modern workplace. We claim to love innovation. We say we value creativity, but in real life, the person who raises uncomfortable truths in meetings gets iced out. The employee who questions inefficient systems gets told they're overthinking. The one who doesn't fake positivity or gossip with coworkers, labeled antisocial. In schools, same deal. Students who follow the rules are rewarded. Students who ask too many questions, labeled disruptive. Not because they're wrong, but because they challenge authority. Even online, where thought is supposed to be free, complexity gets punished. Algorithms reward simplicity, repetition, emotional manipulation, not nuance, not depth, not intelligence. So what happens to the truly intelligent in a system like this? They hide, they shrink, they wear masks just to survive. And eventually, society gets exactly what it wants: silent brilliance, genius buried under self-doubt. Wisdom no one hears because no one ever asked. This is the ultimate irony. We say we want intelligence, but only the kind that behaves, only the kind that doesn't make people uncomfortable, only the kind that fits into a neat little box. But real intelligence, it's messy. It doesn't care about what's trending. It doesn't flatter egos, it confronts them. And that's exactly why society pushes it away. To be truly intelligent is to be misunderstood. To walk into a room and feel out of place, not because you're wrong, but because you're right in ways no one else sees. To feel alone, even surrounded by people, because everyone else is nodding to things you know are false. It's not just rejection, it's exile. Because when you can see through the game, you stop playing it. And when you stop playing it, you stop belonging. That's the real cost of nonconformity. And for those who refuse to betray their own minds, it's a price they quietly pay every single day. But Schopenhauer didn't see that suffering as meaningless. To him, intelligence wasn't a gift. It was a burden, one that only the strong could carry. And those who carry it, they walk a lonelier path, but also a truer one. Arthur Schopenhauer wasn't your typical philosopher. He didn't sugarcoat reality. He didn't sell feel-good ideas. He believed life at its core is suffering, and the more awake you are, the more you feel it. To some, that sounds depressing, but if you've ever lived through that quiet despair of thinking too much and feeling too deeply, it doesn't feel negative. It feels honest, almost like someone finally told the truth. Born in 1788 in Germany, Schopenhauer grew up in a wealthy but emotionally distant household. His father was a cold, rational businessman, his mother a famous writer, but she disapproved of his dark worldview. From an early age, Schopenhauer felt like an outsider. He didn't just live life, he watched it, and that lens shaped his entire philosophy. His most famous belief was this: a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. Schopenhauer believed that intelligence leads to isolation, not by choice, but by consequence. The more clearly you understand the world, the more disconnected you feel from those who live only on the surface of it. At the heart of his worldview was a concept called the will. Schopenhauer said we are all driven by this blind, irrational force that just wants. It doesn't care about logic. It doesn't care about truth. It just craves endlessly, mindlessly, painfully. Most people, he believed, are ruled by this will. They chase pleasure, success, status, not because they've thought it through, but because they're trapped in a cycle of desire they can't even see. But the truly intelligent, the thinkers, the observers, they start to see the trap. They step outside of it. They detach. And that's where the pain begins. Because once you see the world for what it is, a dance of illusions driven by unconscious craving, you can't unsee it. You no longer laugh at the same jokes. You can't engage in small talk that feels fake. You become like a ghost, drifting through a never-ending party, wondering how no one else sees the emptiness. Schopenhauer put it like this: the more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him. Ignorance, in other words, isn't just bliss, it's belonging. Start asking deeper questions about meaning, morality, mortality, and you begin to lose your place in the tribe. Not because people hate you, but because they don't understand you. Schopenhauer didn't hate society. He just believed it served a different purpose than solitude. Society is for entertainment. Solitude is for truth. And the truly intelligent, eventually they crave what society can't offer: silence, clarity, authenticity. That's why Schopenhauer praised solitude not as loneliness but as liberation. Great men are like eagles and build their nest on some lofty solitude. To him, intelligence wasn't glamorous. It was a curse that stripped away comfort and left you face to face with your own soul. And yet, he didn't advocate despair. He believed there was a way forward, not by escaping suffering, but by transforming it. Through contemplation, through art, through philosophy, by turning pain into insight and isolation into wisdom. He was one of the few philosophers brave enough to say, that pain you feel from thinking too much, it's real. The disconnection you feel when no one gets your thoughts, valid. The sense that something is off with the world, you're not imagining it. And that's why his work still resonates, especially with those who feel out of place. Those who sit in meetings, classrooms, family dinners, surrounded by words, but starving for meaning. For Schopenhauer, suffering was the price of clarity, and while the world may mock those who see too much, he whispers from the pages of his books, "You are not broken, you are just awake." His philosophy wasn't meant to fix life. It was meant to help you face it, honestly, to stare into the dark without flinching, to walk through life not with bitterness, but with dignity, because in the end, yes, intelligence may isolate you, but it also connects you to truth, to beauty, to art, to your own soul. And that, Schopenhauer believed, is a higher kind of connection, one no crowd can give you, and no rejection can ever take away. Loneliness is usually seen as a failure of social life, but what if sometimes it's actually the price of deeper thinking? Modern psychology is finally catching up to what philosophers like Schopenhauer sensed centuries ago. High intelligence often comes with high isolation. Let's look at the science. A 2016 study in the British Journal of Psychology uncovered something fascinating. The more intelligent a person is, the less happiness they tend to get from frequent socializing. For most people, being around friends boosts joy, but for highly intelligent individuals, too much social interaction leads to frustration, overstimulation, even emptiness. Why? Because the conversations often feel shallow. Because their minds crave depth, nuance, exploration, not gossip, repetition, or emotional noise. They do care about people, they just struggle with the way society expects us to connect. And this leads to a special kind of loneliness, cognitive loneliness, not just being alone, but being surrounded by people who don't think like you, and feeling more isolated than if you were by yourself. This is where the emotional paradox begins. On one hand, highly intelligent people are incredibly introspective. They analyze, reflect, overthink. They live in their heads, sculpting entire inner worlds that most people never see. But on the other hand, they're human. They still crave connection, intimacy, resonance. They want someone who doesn't just nod, but actually gets it. Someone who can hear the unsaid, who understands the invisible. And that's the trap. The smarter you are, the harder it is to find someone who understands your loneliness. It's not arrogance, it's neuroscience. Dr. Thomas Suddendorf, a cognitive evolution psychologist, explains that our brains evolved in small tribal groups, around 100 to 150 people. Our intelligence developed in environments where the goal was survival through fitting in. But today, modern high IQ individuals live in a completely different world. They process information faster. They think abstractly. They question norms, and because of that, they no longer fit the emotional blueprint of tribal belonging. Their minds become evolutionary misfits, and it hurts, because deep intelligence often brings emotional dysregulation. Not because something's wrong with you, but because too much is going on inside you. Imagine thinking 10 thoughts while everyone else thinks one. Imagine noticing every tiny expression on someone's face. Imagine replaying one word someone said for hours. That level of sensitivity isn't a superpower, it's a burden, and it can lead to anxiety, burnout, even depression. Not because the world is hostile, but because it simply wasn't built to handle people who feel this much and think this deeply. One Harvard study even showed that highly intelligent children report higher levels of alienation and existential anxiety. From an early age, they know they're different, and instead of being celebrated, that difference is often punished. They're told, "You think too much. Why can't you just be normal? Stop asking so many questions." So they internalize that message. Maybe something's wrong with me. And that leads to a lifelong battle between the need for self-expression and the instinct for self-protection. They want to open up, but they've been shut down too many times. They want to connect, but they've learned it's safer to pull away. So they build walls, hoping someone someday will hear the silence behind them, but most people never do. Even in romantic relationships, this pattern shows up. Highly intelligent people often feel unseen, not just admired, but truly understood. They may come off as distant or cold. But the truth is, they're protecting a depth that's been mishandled too many times. It's not that they don't want love. It's that they've realized most people love the idea of intelligence, not the complex emotional reality that comes with it. Psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski had a word for this: overexcitability. It describes a heightened sensitivity in 5 areas: intellectual, emotional, sensory, imaginative, and psychomotor. In simple terms, smart people feel more, think more, and suffer more. And while this intensity fuels creativity, passion, and insight, it also widens the gap between them and the world. But here's the hidden truth. Loneliness isn't always a sign that something is missing. Sometimes it's a sign that something is unmatched, a mind that sees through illusions, a heart that refuses shallow connection, a soul that chooses meaning over comfort. Such people will always feel a bit apart, not because they've failed socially, but because they're wired for something deeper, something rare. So if you've ever felt this kind of loneliness, not just the absence of people, but the absence of resonance, it might not be a curse. It might be a quiet signal that you are among the few who aren't just alive. But awake, you might assume intelligence attracts admiration, and it does at first, but often behind admiration hides something darker, envy. And envy has a strange habit of turning respect into rejection. Most people won't admit it, but in day-to-day life, intelligent individuals often face subtle and sometimes direct resentment, not because they're mean, but because their clarity exposes something painful in others, insecurity. You walk into a room, you speak with insight, depth, confidence, but some people won't hear your words. They'll hear their own inadequacy. They'll feel small, outshined. That sting, that's the ego flinching. This is where the Dunning-Kruger effect kicks in. It's the psychological phenomenon where people with low ability overestimate themselves because they don't know what they don't know. Now put someone truly intelligent in that environment, and suddenly the illusion of competence shatters. People are forced to face their limitations, and many won't accept that. So what do? They label the intelligent person arrogant, cold, thinks they're better than everyone. But the irony, you never said that. Their ego heard it, because intelligence doesn't just challenge ideas, it threatens identities. Throughout history, this pattern repeats. Socrates was executed, not for wrongdoing, but for challenging shallow minds. Galileo was punished, not for bad science, but for threatening the church's authority. Tesla died alone. Turing saved millions and was driven to suicide. These weren't just stories of misunderstanding. They were stories of egoic retaliation, because when someone introduces a new truth, they don't just present a new idea. They expose the lies that people have built their comfort around, and most would rather reject you than reconstruct themselves. Even today, the same thing happens. In meetings, deep thinkers are ignored. In classrooms, they're told they're disruptive. In relationships, they're labeled too much. Why? Because intelligence without conformity threatens the system. It disturbs comfort. It raises standards. It makes mediocrity visible. And that's unforgivable in a world addicted to comfort and illusion. So envy whispers in silence, and ego pulls the trigger. But here's the paradox. People want intelligence, as long as it doesn't make them question themselves. They'll quote a philosopher on Instagram, but sit that same philosopher across from them at dinner. And suddenly it's war. So if you've ever been rejected, not for your flaws, but for your clarity, it's not because you did something wrong. It's because your presence reveals something others weren't ready to face. And in a world ruled by ego, that's more dangerous than evil.